Welcome to another edition of Working with Gen Z. Friends, they say that conflict is part of life. A conflict happens when there is a difference of opinion on values, on a product or thing, and it can emerge between family members, it can emerge at the workplace. And how you handle conflict can determine what happens next. Sometimes, if you're lucky, conflict can be handled very amicably, but for a large part, conflict can take a very bad turn, which is to say that it could create animosity. It could actually create bad relationships with colleagues, with peers, and other stakeholders. So, how does one go about managing conflict given that when a few humans come together, conflict is inevitable? But those who learn to manage conflict and actually can anticipate or even manage conflict after it has happened can actually grow professionally and personally. So today we're going to talk about how we look at conflict, and especially for the Gen Z generation, a generation which is just entering the workforce. And for them, as they think about their long career, 30, 40, 50 years, conflicts are likely to happen. In fact, they're absolutely going to happen. So is that a generation that's going to be a conflict avoiding generation, which is often what they're pegged at? Or if you're a manager, what can you do to help them think and learn about conflict? To help me with that is my guest, Manish Gupta. Manish, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Nikhil.
Absolutely. So, Manish, thank you for accommodating your time today. I know you have a busy week, both last week and upcoming week. So, I'm glad you're able to do this. We are going to dive into conflict and all the elements of conflict, but I want our listeners to hear your story and the illustrious career that you've had. So, tell us a little bit about you and your background first, and then we'll dive into conflict.
Sure. Nikhil, I think I had quite a conventional and boring career, if I can call it that way. It's a very conventional path I took. The choice was between engineering and medicine. And my parents, in their wisdom, thought that if we have one engineer and one doctor in the family, my sister she was showing inclination to become a doctor. So they thought we'll have a self-sufficient family, what today we call as Atmanirbhar. So we had that thing that I can fix all the appliances if they malfunction, if body parts malfunction, my sister can fix it. My father was a banker, so all the financial aspects he can take it. My mother was a professor in college, so all the teaching, education related aspects she can take care. So that was the thought that pushed me towards engineering. And then, of course, I joined Tata's and I quit Tata's to do an MBA. Again, this was more a trend to do an MBA. And I majored in finance. I joined Citibank. I worked there for 17 years. I worked in various areas of the bank. Citibank was famous for, or is still famous for its mobility. They don't, bind you to one department. So that gives you, I think, multi-departmental exposure, widens your perspectives. And then 11 years ago, I left initially with the hope to join an NGO, to run an NGO. And then soon after that, I realized that maybe I'm better suited to leverage my skills to do coaching and to consult and to conduct leadership workshops. So that's where I am in the last 11 years.
Fantastic. So I know, Manish, again, you're too kind, too humble. I think that you have a great combination of the engineering skills and now also for a large part, almost 2 decades with a global bank, which, as you mentioned, that with a firm like Citi, you must have handled many roles, and I know very senior roles. So you would have handled different stakeholders, and banking being what banking is, it can be a very competitive kind of world and conflicts can bound to happen. So we're going to tap into your rich history and work there. So let's begin, Manish. Of course, you and I are at a stage where we've seen 2.5, 3 decades worth of work life, and maybe we've experienced conflicts in different form. But this is again an episode or show that we're trying to help our younger managers. So let's start a very basics first. Just what is conflict, and maybe in your experience from the teams you led and all the roles that you've done, what are some of the common causes of conflict?
Okay. I think I can condense the two questions into one single answer. And I would say a conflict is a disagreement between two parties or three parties. As whenever party, it could be, in fact, a conflict could be within yourself. It could be intrapersonal conflict. I have a conflict with myself. But it's a disagreement between two or more parties where they perceive a threat to their needs, their wants, their interests, their status, their sense of identity, their well-being, their concerns. So it's actually, it arises out of perceived threat to their needs and interests and identity and things like that. So when you ask me what could cause it, I would say there are generally 4 or 5 reasons, key reasons. One could be a task conflict in an organization, for example, that I don't think I should do this task. This is your job, your job versus my job. So that is one cause, that I don't think this task belongs to me, or it belongs to me. Why are we giving it to somebody else? The second could be a process conflict, which is I want to do it this way, but you tell me to do it that way. And we have a conflict on the way certain thing has to be done, or the timeline within which it has to be finished. So it could be that time conflict. It could also be a conflict of relationship, which can mean, for example, that I want you to spend more time with me, but you don't. I want you to invest in my career success, but you are always busy with yourself in meetings and uh, you know projecting yourself and developing yourself. What about me if I'm your junior? It could be that you haven't invested time and effort to build the trust, and yet you always criticize me. You always pick holes in my work. You never appreciate me. So that could be one. So I'm bucketing it in the relationship. And the fourth, very critical one, I think, is conflict can come because somebody's status or sense of identity is fractured in some way. For example, if I take pride in having a lot of attention to detail, so I think I'm very meticulous. And my senior tells me, Manish, your work has a lot of holes, a lot of gaps, a lot of inaccuracies, a lot of. So then what my boss or somebody tells me directly conflicts with my sense of identity, that I am a meticulous worker. I have a high attention to detail. So sometimes things where a conversation or a comment conflicts with my own sense of status or identity, that can also create conflict.
Absolutely. No, beautifully explained. I think you've explained what conflict is. And I really like what you said, Manish, which perhaps often we ignore is the conflict within ourselves.
Yeah.
But that is probably an as bigger or important conflict. But it's something where you have a difference of opinion or a perceived threat, as you said, with other stakeholders. And then, of course, all the four buckets about how conflict can happen or what are the causes of conflict. Now, let's keep moving where let's now you explain what conflict is, you explain what can cause conflict. Are there stages of conflict? In other words, you and I are working and we've had a very cordial working relationship. And could it be that one event can erupt into a conflict, or do you sense that it is brewing slowly, that I sense, Manish is not responding to my emails, and, I see a pattern and I'm becoming angry or whatever, or can it go gradually and then become a conflict?
Sure, very interesting, Nikhil. So both can happen. And in conventionally, I will say it depends. But
Right.
I would say that mostly is of a kind which simmers. So there is a ground, there is already a established ground for conflict. But of course, we don't surface it. We don't correct the problem at a very nascent stage, and it simmers and it becomes bigger and bigger. And then, like a volcano, it will burst one day. And the counterparty may be taken by surprise because they never knew the intensity of grief that we are feeling, and they were taken by surprise. They're shocked. But of course, it can also happen suddenly where there's no background. So both can happen. I think in my experience, mostly the one that happens is of the simmering kind. They start small and then we don't address it at time, and then it balloons and becomes volcanic eruption. But let me give you an example. Okay. Now this is from personal life. So I'm not saying my personal life, but everyone's personal life. Suppose you and your partner or spouse, and your partner doesn't like any one habit of yours. Let's say someone doesn't clean the washroom after they had a bath. So they leave it wet, or they leave a wet towel on the bed, let's say. Okay. A common complaint. Now, if a spouse tells me, let's say me, a spouse tells me that Manish, you you have left your bathroom wet. Now I have to go take a bath. It I don't like it that way. Can you from tomorrow start wiping the bathroom floor clean, dry before I go for a bath? Or can you please hang your towel to dry and not leave it on the bed? Now, that is a classic concept we call as complaint. Complaint is, I don't like something, your habit or the way of working, and I point it to you and I ask you to take corrective action. I also tell you why it affects me negatively. Here,
Yeah.
that is complaint. Now, how it develops. Suppose I don't pay heed to it. I ignore it. Now my spouse is of course she's seething because she's saying this guy doesn't listen to me. And next time when she talks to me, she uses these two words, always or never. Same thing, but adds two words, always or never. She says, you always leave the bathroom floor bed. You always, keep the towel on the bed. You never hang the towel for drying. The moment you use the two words always and never, a, a complaint becomes criticism. Yeah. So that is now conflict is now building up. Now imagine I still don't take notice. I still keep ignoring her needs. Now what may happen is that she's now seething more and more. And now the volcano is about to erupt. And now she may say, you will not improve. You will not change. And look at me. Look at the way I do things for you. And look at yourself. Now that creates a situation which is called contempt.
Yeah.
Contempt is nothing but evolved stage of criticism where you're feeling so helpless that you land up comparing yourself with the other person. And in comparison, what happens is you land up saying that I am better than you. And that deeply hurts. So I would say the three stages of evolution, one is starts with complaint. If you don't attend to it, it becomes criticism. If you still don't attend to it, it becomes contempt. And contempt is a stage which is really hurtful.
Yeah. No, I really like the example. I'm sure many of our listeners can relate to it, where it could be very small or nascent on what one party may think is quite trivial, and suddenly uh, it while it could still be small, but no action, no response, or no proper kind of attention to the other stakeholders' expectation can balloon quickly, right? And I think I really like the three stages. So that's now the kind of the, let's say that the gradual build up. Let's now talk about maybe, preventing versus the post. So in other words, we know now what conflict is. We look at the causes of conflict. We look at that conflict can happen either slowly or fast. Um, so in context of the Gen Z, because they're new, maybe unaware of some of these things or the climate of the organization, and simply are not led because they're largely by themselves. And if they're listening, how do we tell them to say that, okay, uh, how do I, if I'm a boss, now this is a more for the leaders who are managing Gen Z, to say that, okay, how do I try and do something beforehand or preventive before the conflict gets to that stage? So that's one part of the question. And the second, of course, is, maybe I don't have the skills, maybe I didn't pay attention, as in that story that you were explaining, and a conflict has erupted. So then how do I handle it, right? So one is, maybe are there steps or tricks or ways in which you can anticipate and maybe diffuse the conflict before, and then post could be that, what, too bad, it just happened, but I have to now kind of resolve it going forward. So anything that you can share there?
Sure. So let's tackle the first question, which is how do you prevent a conflict? Now, by the way, by prevention, I don't mean to say conflict is not healthy.
Sure.
I actually think that conflicts are, first of all, inevitable. Second, conflicts are actually very healthy. In a sense, you can have an unhealthy conflict as well, but you can also steer a conflict towards a healthy consequence.
Yeah.
A conflict which is healthy, which is managed well, can create a lot of ideas. It's a great source for ideation, for innovation, for creativity. So I would not say that conflict avoidance is the right strategy. You can minimize conflict, you can leverage conflict, you can benefit from conflict. But to your question, how can we anticipate conflict? I would say conflicts can be anticipated by having a conversation with people to understand their real needs. Now, what happens is I may talk to people and I may understand in that conversation what they want, or but the want may look superficial. What is the underlying hidden need that is unaddressed? So, do I have an understanding of their real needs? For example, I may I may be coming to office in the morning. maybe some days at 8:30, some days at 9, some days at 9:30. My boss doesn't like it. My boss wants that I should be punctual, I should be predictable, because it is their need. And they don't want the culture of the company to get spoiled, that everyone thinks you can walk in anytime. Let's say the company is somewhat rigid about it. Now, their need is they want certainty of my arrival. They also want to set an example for others. They want company's culture to get spoiled. But what is my need? My need is flexibility. Yeah. So now, if my senior doesn't know that for me flexibility is a very important need, they will misunderstand. They will think, "Oh, this guy's not interested. He doesn't care, or he's not simply interested in his work, or he's too casual." Whereas my need could be flexibility. Of course, if I have a conversation with my senior, and the senior tells me why they insist on me being punctual and what is the underlying need, not just their need, but from the organizational perspective, the culture they're trying to build. Then I may say that, look, I understand your perspective, and I think this need of the organization probably ranks in higher priority compared to my need for flexibility. And I may say, okay, fine, from tomorrow I will take care. Or I could convince my senior that, look, this is fine, but my need at this stage, maybe because there's some family issue that I'm grappling with, which will probably for another month or so, I'll need to be flexible. So kindly give me flexibility with full knowledge that after the issue at home is over, I will become punctual. So I think it's the primary focus should be to understand, to have a conversation and to understand each other's unarticulated, unmet needs. And very often people don't talk about it unless we ask probing questions, unless we ask them to help us understand the need behind the need. Why do you exhibit this behavior?
Yeah.
So I think that's very key.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's excellent. I really like that, something just basic, simple as, I mean, really, as you said, unpeel that layer of the need. Just understand that, and just having a conversation. Now, if you're a Gen Z, if you're new, what's your advice to them? Should they go to the boss? How often should they go to the boss? Should they talk to the peer first? Because they're in a new company, they're in a young career, and they're kind of learning. So I really like the idea of conversation, and sometimes perhaps our managers are more guilty of not doing it than the peers or the sort of their direct reports. But here, let's flip it. First, what should the Gen Z be thinking about that? Okay, I'm grappling with something. Uh, um, do I bother my boss enough where he gets irritated, or is it okay for me to do that? And then second could be, even as a boss, as you mentioned, Manish, the conversation, like how frequent should that be? I mean, there's probably no rule, but like, the advice of, what is common sense is not always very common, right? And so therefore, let's two parts of the question, from the leader's perspective or the manager's perspective versus the Gen Z's perspective. Any guidance on, how can they make conversations maybe somewhat routine?
Sure. So very often when I conduct workshops and I talk to people, and a lot of Gen Z people and a lot of managers who are not Gen Zs, who are just
Yeah.
one level behind them, I find that most people do not have conversations with their seniors as often as they would like. And very often the reason could be that my boss is very busy. He doesn't have time, or she doesn't have time. So that is one fact that I've seen. And when I interview people and ask them how often does your boss sit down with you, theoretically on paper they're supposed to have one-on-one conversations, say once in a month. Usually what happens is maybe once in a quarter or twice in a year. Sometimes not even once a year. You only sit down just once for the annual appraisal. That's it. So that's a stark reality of the world today. I would advise the seniors to at least have a fortnightly conversation, if not a weekly, a short 10-minute check-in session, maybe more frequently, and then maybe a longish conversation once in a month. So that is one aspect. Second aspect from a senior's perspective is, you don't have to have a conversation every time. You can also, when you notice a behavior which is a praiseworthy, you simply praise your junior. It doesn't require you to have a formal meeting. And whenever you notice something, that is the opportunity to give some constructive feedback. Do it there and then, same day or at best next day. So if you follow that practice, and a lot of times what people do is, managers in particular, they note down, and then in their formal one-on-one, they will give feedback about something that happened maybe 1 or 2 months earlier. By which time the memory of that episode is quite foggy in the minds of the junior person. So I would advise the seniors two things. One is to have a 10-minute conversation, maybe once in a week, once in a fortnight, and maybe a longer conversation once in a month. But apart from that, whenever there's an opportunity for learning or for appreciating, do have a short appreciative conversation or a short constructive conversation with your team member as soon as you notice something, same day or latest next day. So that will anyway increase the number of touch points that the two will have together. That is one. Now let's flip it to the millennial, the Gen Z. The Gen Z, of course, they should have a conversation with their senior. They should seek them out. What happens is, if the senior is perception about senior is he's always very busy or she's always very busy, then the team members will feel hesitant.
Mm.
So I would say that you have to demand a conversation. Say, I need your time because after all, you're my senior. And one of your key roles is to invest your time in me, in my growth, in my learning, in having a in guiding me, in coaching me, in having a career conversation, in clarifying my doubts, addressing my concerns. That is, you are a people manager. If you think about it, that's your main job. So why should people get so caught up in day-to-day transactions and firefighting that they have no time left for the core part of their job, this people manager? So the juniors or the Gen Z should actually ask the seniors to, create a slot in the calendar, say once a week, once in a fortnight, and say, this is the time you have to allocate to me. Even if it's 10, 15 minutes, it's okay. But put it on the schedule, on the calendar as a recurring invite, and make sure you go and demand conversation. Second thing they can do is, they can demand a feedback. So why should you wait for a reactive feedback to come from the senior? Why can't you go and seek proactive feedback from your senior? I said, tell me in the last week or two that you observed me, what have I done well and what could I do better? Now, since you ask this question proactively, now senior has given some observations, shared some feedback, then you work on it, you clarify if things are not clear, you work on it, and then you go back and say, this is what you told me, this is what I've implemented. Have you seen a change in me? What else can I do? So it becomes a way of having a regular dialogue, because you not only seek feedback, you work on it, implement it, and then you go back and apprise your senior of the change you brought in yourself and the improvements that you've seen, what they have seen, what else can you do. So it becomes a kind of a regular feature then. It's not episodic, it becomes more frequent.
Yeah. No, I think that is an advice that I'm going to repeat. I think for all our Gen Z listeners, to say that, look, this may become or sound uncomfortable, but as you rightly said, it's almost demanding it. And sometimes the manager, uh, may have a blind spot. In other words, they feel that, they've given instructions at the beginning of the project and that's their job and that's it. And they don't have to do anything more until the project comes to an end. But I think, the frequency of a week or fortnight or whatever that can work in your own context is very essential for their own growth. And I would say perhaps even for the manager, right? Because the manager then is forced to, make very tangible observations or, give feedback, or as we're talking about in this case, and, if a conflict could be brewing, just address it. So fantastic. Some really good tips there. Now, let's talk about, Manish. We've done everything about, I think the point about conversations is very valid and important. You explained the stages that could be leading to a conflict. Let's say, despite all of this, or maybe we ignored it, or it wasn't present in the system, or the manager is not doing it, a full blown conflict has happened.
Yeah.
And now what? I mean, what are the ways to, kind of, do some damage control? And I'm talking about now in three specific contexts, Manish, as as someone who's done banking at senior levels. Like, what would you say could be, let's say one with the customer, which could be a very different conversation or approach versus, let's say, a peer. Two equals are getting into a shouting match. The third could be a boss and a subordinate, right? So any comments there or anything where you can say that, okay, maybe they need to be different, or here is how we should try and think about post the conflict.
Sure, sure. So I think the approach could be slightly different, but the basic construct will remain the same. Let me share a story with you. So this is a real example. Um, a company had two senior executives, both reporting the CEO. So they were CXOs.
Yeah.
And they could not stand each other. So let's imagine it's you and me, okay, for the sake of simplicity. So Nikhil and Manish, we cannot stand each other. Now, Manish uh, writes an email to Nikhil, and then he calls Nikhil. And Nikhil knows about Manish because something in Manish's demeanor irritates Nikhil, because Manish always wants everything to be done as soon as if everything is urgent, everything is like if the house is on fire. So that is his demeanor. He may not mean it, but that's a demeanor. So what I do is I write an email to you. I need some data from you, or I need some solution to a problem from you. You are a department head, I'm a department head. And I write an email. Within few minutes, I call you. And when I call you, I will sound extremely urgent, as if my need is supreme. It overrides everything that you are doing. That may be my demeanor. Now, you've observed that with me, and you have evolved coping mechanisms. And by that, I mean that you stop taking my calls. You've told your secretary that whenever Manish calls, please tell him that I'm busy, I'm in a meeting or whatever. And if, of course, Manish now has your mobile number and he calls you directly. And again, you send a message, I'm busy, I'm in a meeting, I'll call you back. Or you pick up the phone and you pose as if you can't hear me, as if the signal strength is quite weak. So all that drama happens. Okay. Now, these two people cannot stand each other. Okay. Now, think about this as a problem. And every time this happens, I escalate to the CEO. I said, this guy doesn't respond. So I send a message to you, copying the CEO. I said, I tried to call you, I couldn't reach you. So, so escalation in a way.
Yeah.
The CEO is tired about the two of us. And that he thinks or she thinks that we are mature people. And why do we have this conflict? But we cannot stand each other.
Yeah.
Now, if I ask you, how do you think we should approach the situation? What do you think? What comes to your mind?
Well, ideally, as you rightly said, the CEO is probably thinking two very senior people. They should figure it out on their own.
On their own, yeah. But we haven't been able to.
But certainly it's not happening. So the need for that conversation that you explained perhaps needed to happen, or maybe a mediator needs to come now that it's too late to bring back a practice, or create a practice where put all the differences on the table. Maybe those things are getting pushed behind the wall. I don't know.
So in this real story, what happened? The CEO called for external help.
Oh,
Consultant was brought in, and the consultant took these people. There was an offsite where she was to address everyone, but she had to resolve this conflict earlier. So she took them aside. And she asked Manish. It says, Manish, if you were to coach Nikhil to be more effective, to be more productive, what coaching advice will you give Nikhil? And likewise, she asked Nikhil that if Nikhil, you have to coach Manish to become better, what advice will you have for him? So we're not talking about conflict. We've actually reframed the whole thing. So now the focus is not on conflict. The focus is on how can I help Nikhil become better, more productive, and more useful for the company, and Nikhil vice versa for me. So this thing starts. So Manish reveals to the consultant that, look, the problem is that Nikhil does not respond to my emails. And he doesn't respond to emails, I know that. I have to call him up. He doesn't pick up my call. I get very upset. I escalate to CEO. And of course, after all this escalation, finally things get done. But we don't enjoy the relationship because he does not, respond to my emails. So if I have to coach him, I would say, Nikhil, please respond to my emails. Please pick up the phone. And by the way, all this email, pick up the phone, and the escalation just happens in a matter of 5-10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't have breathing space, but that is my type, my personality. Type A personality maybe. So now The consultant goes to Nikhil and says, Nikhil, what kind of coaching advice do you have for Manish? Nikhil says, Manish's demeanor is very, very aggressive. He writes an email to me. Within a couple of minutes, he calls me up. And if I don't pick up this call, he escalates to CEO. And he puts me down in front of the CEO. So imagine his status is getting compromised, that I am not matured enough. So every email has to have an escalation of the CEO. And I don't like it because remember we said one of the biggest reasons for conflict is loss or perceived loss of status or loss of identity. I think I'm a capable person, but this person escalates to CEO, which means I'm not capable enough. Right. Yeah. So she says, okay, let's discuss more. And this happens. And ultimately, what they figure out is that what is Manish's need, the real need of Manish. After all, Manish and Nikhil both are working for the company. They both want the company to succeed. The clients will be happy, for everyone to be productive. In this conversation, what dawns is that Manish's overriding need is need for certainty. He wants, no, he doesn't want his work to be done at the same very moment. Of course, it's not possible. Work will take maybe 1 or 2 days or more. What happens is the way Manish comes out, it looks as if everything that he's saying is urgent, whereas his real need is need for certainty. So he'd be very happy if Nikhil could simply acknowledge the email and say, I'm in receipt of your email. I have enough information to work on an email, or I need this XYZ data from you to be able to effectively respond to you. And can I respond to you in 2 days' time? And if he simply acknowledges the email and tells me if everything is okay or does he need more help from me and gives me a timeline which is not too far in the future, a reasonable timeline, say 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, I'll be okay. I'll be okay. Now, this conversation happened and everyone realizes that Manish's real need is certainty. Now, what is Nikhil's need? Nikhil needs respect. He feels violated, disrespected. His status and identity is in a way impacted or harmed because of the way Manish conducts himself. So once he understands that the real need of Manish, even though he comes across as very aggressive and everything is urgent, really what he needs is assurance. He needs assurance. He needs certainty. That's his real need. And Nikhil's real need is respect. Yeah. So if Manish gets what he gets from me, which is I will write an email to him, I'll tell him I'll respond to him in 2 days' time, is it okay? Then Manish will not escalate to the CEO, will not have to call me necessarily. I mean, I'm even in the middle of a meeting. I may be with a customer. I cannot pick up Manish's call every time. But that inflames him further. He escalates to the CEO. So if he knows that Manish will respond and respond with a timeline commitment, can in that case Nikhil treat Manish with kindness, with respect? Yeah. Now, when this conversation took place, matters got resolved because both parties understood that their demeanor was conveying something very different from their real need, and that is sometimes the real crux of the issue. That my real need is hidden deep inside, and my way of working does not convey the real need. And so conflicts happen and get aggravated when the real need was so simple and it could have been addressed very easily.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that was such a great example, great story. And yeah, I mean, perhaps even taking cue from that story, it could happen in the highest level or the senior most level. You can imagine, maybe it could be something that is happening at another place in the organization. Now, Manish, you've consulted with so many companies and with all your client work that you do. In your view, are there companies that you admire, or you obviously explained the pre and the post of a conflict, but you admire where they say that they've really um, built a nice culture, if you will, of managing conflicts? Because I think ultimately, as one of the questions that I was asking earlier was that if how you manage some of these things has an impact both internally and externally, right? So I think if I have, and I can think of one particular client where there is an escalation culture, which is like for even the simplest of the thing, within one email, I think two of their bosses have to be CC'd, and only when that happens, the guy will do something. And so it became almost like a norm that, okay, unless you do that, this person won't do it unless I do this, and then he would start moving. And so I'm just thinking, and I'm asking that, uh, can you think of companies or even from your own experience where if something like that's there, which makes it better because if you don't manage it, it has an impact outside of the company. And then very recently, I was in Bangalore where one company said that that there is a sense of friction between departments. And Manish didn't do his part, I did my part, and therefore, when the customer asked, I don't really care that we're going as one voice or one unit. I started blaming Manish, and I think so some of that internal stakeholder conflict can push outside of the organization, right? So
Right.
anything that you can share a story, or maybe you already said some fantastic stories, but maybe you can think of where some companies have done it reasonably well.
Sure. So let me actually flip the question. Let me share with you some examples where the companies unnecessarily mess it up, and for a very small, silly reason. So let me give you an example. A company where, again, a B2B enterprise, where you are selling to large companies, and you have got these key account managers. So out of say 1,000 customers, they may have maybe 150 customers which are classified as key accounts, and these people who are managing them are called key account managers. Now, they have a sense of frustration with the supporting functions, logistics, spares, sales, and service. They feel very frustrated that these fellows do not deliver on their promise, on their turnaround times or whatever, and we lose face in front of a customer. It jeopardizes our subsequent orders. It spoils our relationship. So all that happens. Now, when I met some of these people, I asked this question. I said, when you decide on this, when classifying an account as a key account, do you ever call a meeting where you involve the enabling functions, logistics, spares, service, supply chain? They said, no, why should they be involved? I said, look, what has happened is that you classified accounts on your own. You also decided on the turnaround times, the expected ones. Of course, they have to get better than the norm. So you want to wow them. So you've got those metrics decided, but you did not make the enabling functions feel important. I said, how often do you take them on a call with you when you go and meet the head of technology, head of engineering, head of R&D? They said, never. Why should they come on a call? I said, they don't come on a call with you. So they don't understand the client, how difficult it is for anybody to get an account. What kind of flack do you face from them? You don't understand. They don't understand the client situation. They don't understand if that our material doesn't get delivered on time, the cascading impact of that on that company's production and delivery to their customers in turn. So you have kept the enabling functions too isolated from the real work that you're doing with the client. So why would they have empathy, sensitivity for your customer? Because you haven't actually taken them with you. You haven't consulted them. You've not made them part of the team. The team does not involve them. It's only you. I said the more and more you involve them as part of the team, they will be equally committed to all the customer, because now it's not just your customer, it's also their customer. Now think about it. Such a simple thing. And when I discussed this, they were dumbstruck. They say, is it? It's so simple to do. But we never thought about it. So think about it. The converse now, if a team, if the frontline functions start involving the enabling functions, say operations, supply chain, service, spares, they start involving them in determining how to wow the customer, how to delight the customer, starting them in meetings so that they get a check of the ground reality. Then automatically the silos will get broken and people will be aligned to the common goal. So I think that is one example that comes to my mind. And in organizations where they have done that, where they're not, of course, silos will always be there, but the silos exist, but still there is less friction because everyone is aligned towards a common goal. In those organizations, I find they can leverage conflict. They can leverage conflict for ideation, for offering better solutions to customers, compared to the companies which are fighting all the time internally on firefighting, on handling customer issues. They have no time to deliberate, ideate on what to do better. They're fighting even to retain status quo. So the big difference between these two companies.
No, absolutely. I think what a good example again. And I can think of, Manish, a very similar story where this was a downstream oil company, and you had the marketing people who were trying to sell oil to, let's say, an airline because that's their customer, and then you have the production team on the other end which has to produce and refine oil. You have all the people in between. There's the supply, logistics, where they have to ship the oil, and in between. And so when the marketing person promises something, they don't have a clue of, okay, how quickly can the production person refine, and they make promises which cannot be kept, and then the customer ultimately gets upset. But you're right, so they created a committee of sorts, if you will, for 4 or 5 key functions from the production till the end. And I think you're right, because when you do that, that's where, I think, to your point earlier in the show where you mentioned that conflicts can become healthy. I think when all stakeholders are there, perhaps they can debate out within each other to say that, what, maybe what you're promising is unrealistic, or I think we can be more aggressive. And that's where I think the conflicts are, I think.
Can I give you one example?
Sure.
So this is, so I asked a question to my audience recently, and I asked them, these were all B2B, key account managers. So I asked them, I said, let me give you 5, 6 parameters and tell me what is the perceived importance of this for the client. One was price of your product. One was product features and durability, is features. Then I say sales acumen that you have, people like you, service, logistics. So things like that. So I gave them several parameters and they assigned weightages. Then I shared with them a study. And by the way, what happened is that the weightage they had assigned to say service was about 15%. Sales again, 10 to 15%. Price, 30%, 20 to 30%. Product features, durability, again very high. So then I shared with them a McKinsey study. So McKinsey had done a study, interestingly, in 2 parts. One is what people tell them as a relative weightage of all these parameters. And they actually figured out a way in which they could figure out the actual, not the perceived, but the actual value of all these features for a client. So when they did a study, they figured out that people tell them, service 15%, quality of salespeople maybe 7%, price maybe 20%, features maybe 20%. Or they had done all that. But McKinsey had a way to figure out not just perception of people, how do they actually, what actually matters. And in that study, they figured out that the sales effort, which people were saying is only 7%, actually was actually 15%. The service, which is after sales, which the people said 15% value, was actually 30%. And the largest component, so imagine now the dichotomy. When I ask a key account manager, what is your perception? In their perception, the price, the product features, the durability, they are the highest. In a client, from a client perspective, it's not the price or the product features, it's the service, which are the highest priority, highest weightage of 30%. So very often there are these disconnects, which happen because I don't know the reality of the customer. I only perceive something, but the reality is not known to me. And if, by the way, if this reality was known to that client, they would take the service people along. They will make them the stakeholders in the process of sales, and not treat them like a support function. So that, I think, is a big difference. Treating your enabling functions as enabling functions or as support functions. That's a big difference.
No, I think, again, these are excellent examples because we see this in large companies, but oftentimes this is visible even in mid-sized companies. And therefore, I think for a Gen Z who is listening, I think I think talking about collaboration is so critical. As you mentioned, if we can proactively bring your stakeholders together, and managing the reality versus the perception. And because the point about service is so valid. I mean, like, you got a good, I think about white goods. Like, if you got a good fridge, fantastic. But that whole experience is compromised when something goes wrong and the guy doesn't come. Then it takes away everything else that you built for. Like, the product value declines.
Yes.
So fantastic, Manish. I think we've covered so many elements. I think we've covered perhaps all aspects. I think right from what is conflict, the causes, the pre and the post of conflict, the culture of conflict. One final question as a way to close out is that okay, as a way to just end, what are maybe two words of advice or sort of wisdom where you can say that okay, what are some of the do's and don'ts if you're a manager? Think about conflict.
Yeah.
And then also do's and don'ts from the Gen Z's perspective. What can they do? Can they read before they join a company? Can they talk more to our colleagues or whatnot, right? So let's talk manager. What can they do, not do, one or two things? And similarly for the Gen Z.
Sure. I will combine the two. I'll say
Sure.
my recommendation will probably similar for both. And I think I'm drawn towards this Thomas Gilman model of conflict management. I really like it a lot because it helps you understand that a lot of times we prioritize our own needs and then we enter a domain of compete. Sometimes we give away our needs, our priorities, and then we become very accommodating to the other side. Sometimes we believe in compromise. We believe in give and take. But as per this model, the best approach would be called collaborating, which means I assert my needs. At the same time, I value other people's needs as much as I value my own needs. And that can lead to a win-win. So I think the mindset has to be one of expanding the pie. If you go to a restaurant, let's say you order a dish, let's say order a cake. And if there are 15 people jumping to grab a share of the cake, the mindset is how can I grab a larger share? Because if I don't, then some days we'll have a larger share, have a smaller shares. So that's a fixed pie mindset. What if, on the other hand, let's say you've gone for a buffet and there's plenty of food. So everyone can have to the heart's content. So why can't we imagine life not as a small cake and people jumping on it, but as a buffet where food is unlimited and everyone can have their fill? So I would say that the first thing that everyone should do is come out of this mindset of I win, you lose, or you win, I lose. So either competing or too much of accommodation, or even avoidance, or even compromise. I would say compromise should be the second option. The first option should be how can I expand the pie? How can I create a win-win outcome for both? I think that is one. The second thing I would say is that before you try to explain your perspective to the other person, listen to their perspective with an open mind, with curiosity, with humility, with open-mindedness. Understand with the intent to understand, not with the intent to respond. So once you say, we have a conflict, but I want to understand your perspective first. So the person suddenly gets disarmed because he or she didn't expect that to happen. That person would have thought that, oh, this person will pull rank on me, will tell me, let me first tell you my perspective, because you are anyway kalka bacha, you are just a junior guy with no experience. So this bias that managers have, the kalka bacha bias, that what do you know? What can you tell me? I think that also plays a part. And a lot of times people will land up speaking more than they will listen. And I would say, reverse the equation. I would say Pareto's principle inverted. Instead of 80-20, 20-80. If you listen more than you speak to your team members, to anybody, I'm saying if I have a conflict with anybody, be my junior or senior, doesn't matter, or peer, doesn't matter. As long as my intent is to listen more, to understand them honestly, with an open mind, understand their perspective. Why do they think the way they think? Because very often what happens, we start doubting other people's intent. That is the stupid thing we do. We should not doubt. I'm not saying that every intent is noble, but at least for 99% of the cases, people's intents are in the right place. So why do I doubt anybody's intent? I should say, they think this way. There must be a reason behind it. Let me probe that reason. Let me tease it out. And that can only happen if I probe, if I ask questions, if I listen properly. I think that will be my common advice to both people, that please don't hurry into explaining your perspective. First, understand other people's perspective, why they think the way they think, why they behave the way they behave, what are the underlying beliefs, underlying assumptions, underlying sometimes misremembrance of facts. I may not remember my facts, I may misremember them. So everything will come out. My assumptions, my beliefs, my biases, my misremembrance of facts, everything will come out. My needs will come out, and that will help the other person understand the perspective of the counterparty. And I think that is one. The second thing is, please work on a win-win mindset, in the collaborating mindset, and not in the competing or the accommodating mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow. Such golden advice, which cannot be, repeated enough. Which is to say that we need to increase and create a mindset which says increase the size of the pie, right? Rather than fighting for a piece of the pie, and just the really very important point of listening to understand. I think perhaps 90% or maybe 95, 99% of the time, I think we can diffuse the anger or the explosion that could be coming if we just with a clean intent listen to our stakeholders. So Manish, this has been one fabulous conversation. I want to thank you, and I do know you're a very highly sought after leadership colleague. So where can people find more about you, what you do, for the workshops that you attend, for the workshop that you conduct. And so please tell us more where people can reach you on such beautiful topics where you help out clients.
Nikhil, first of all, I must thank you for inviting me for this conversation. Uh, and the second thing is how people can find me. They can find me on my website, letstalkleadership.in. They can write to me at hello@letstalkleadership.in. They can find me easily. And I'm very, very topic agnostic. And I believe that everything is interlinked. So I don't just specialize in a very microscopic way on one topic. I do workshops across the range: leadership, strategy, succession planning, change, managerial effectiveness, um, competency building. So there are about 50, 60 topics that we do. And of course, I have a bunch of people who work with me. So they do. So we are topic agnostic. We do sales, key account management. I'm saying you name the topic and we do it. And we believe that everything is interlinked. And if you just become a narrow specialist, you probably are missing out on gems that you could harvest from other topics which look distant, which look disconnected, but actually are very, very, they're actually connected in some way or the other. So that is our thesis, our hypothesis. And we are a bunch of keen learners. We are always inquisitive, curious, and we all of us have industry expertise. Yeah. So we don't come with only a theoretical perspective. Since we worked for at least 19, 20 years in large corporations, we bring a lot of industry perspective to our workshops. Yeah.
Fantastic, Manish. So I will ask all listeners to do check out your website, and I can speak and vouch for everything that Manish has said. That he is highly sought after, highly respected by his clients, and just from the amazing testimonials I have heard and I've seen, he's the guy for many of your questions and problems at the workplace. So check it out again. But I do want to thank you, Manish, for taking the time on a Sunday for a topic which is so very important, not only in the workplace but even in a personal life. So I think you really beautifully explained all the elements. And hopefully, all our Gen Z listeners, our managers, perhaps even the first-time managers, the mid-managers, the senior managers, can all take a leaf out of, just practicing, what may they have learned, rather than just sort of saying that I know it intellectually. I think you've given some very practical tips. Thank you once again. Have a good weekend, and hope to see you soon in our travels at the workplace. Okay,
Sure, Nikhil. Thank you once again.
take care. Bye.
It was a pleasure.